What's up, everybody? I just was reading this book of slides, and this is all David Hawkins. And I wanted to dive into this concept that was inspired by slide 8, Earth Epochs and Calibrations. It's on page 27 if you have the book. This is something that I would describe as something that I recently learned a lot about, which is breaking codependency cycles. And so that's the goal of this video by the end, is to kind of understand how codependency cycles is a zero-sum game where there's only a certain number of slices, let's say, of a pie. And if I have one slice, that's less for everyone else. And there's a way to go about things that breaks out of that cycle and makes it and so that you could even have something like synergy where 1 + 1 = 3. And if you and I are working together, but we don't have a codependency on each other, then our working together does not require that we give any energy that we don't receive back, not necessarily from the other person, but from life itself. And so kind of to dive in, he starts out how planet Earth essentially was a spin-off of condensed energy of galactic origin. So in the same way we would say we're all stardust, and so is Earth. And in this process, consciousness, in order to come to be, consciousness took on all of the attributes that the physical world took on. In the same way that the microcosm is the macrocosm, the consciousness and the physical both have correspondence. And so if we look at the way that the material world developed, we can also learn certain things about consciousness and how it developed over time. So for life to survive and later evolve, he says, the prime requisite is that it be designed with survival as its primary goal and consequence. And self-propagation, self-interest, and self-servingness were a priori requirements for any primitive life form to survive or succeed. In other words, every life form had to be programmed with that one goal in mind, like I've got to propagate, I've got to multiply, I've got to replicate, and in order to do that, I have to acquire energy that then is going to allow me to propagate on and continue my species along. And so then he goes into energy is a necessity of life that had to be acquired. So survival, energy equals survival. Acquisition of energy equals survival, propagation, replication. So it all starts with, we're all programmed as little energy harvesters, all of us humans, but also life forms. And, there are predators that have to acquire energy by eating other animals. There are herbivores which have to acquire energy by eating vegetables or vegetation. There are plants that have to harvest energy from the sun, so they developed an integrated system called photosynthesis. Microorganisms had to develop an integrated system to acquire energy by, let's say, eating other microorganisms, or a lot of the same ways that as above, so below. There's a correspondence. Microorganisms are largely just animals on a microscopic scale, and they function in a similar way to the ecosystem on the animal kingdom level. And so he basically goes into kind of what I was talking about. The fulfillment of this basic necessity was accomplished by the development of survival systems of extraordinary complexity and ingenuity to acquire energy. All these different life forms developed all these systems to be able to acquire that energy. Super, super interesting. There were developments of the quality of intelligence innate in the field of consciousness itself before they appeared in the physical world as living forms. So essentially what he's saying is, like, if the thought preceded the actual thing, or the consciousness preceded the actual thing. And so the conscious level, or the thought-based level, and even like the psychic energetic level, was modeled after the material level. And so in the same way that the animal kingdom might survive, we can look at all of us humans on a psychic level, or on a mind-based level, have similar energetic requirements, and we're wired in the same way to acquire energy. So that then starts to get into what I mentioned about this codependency, and how we have this zero-sum game. And at the first level of our sort of development, we are dependent on our parents, let's say, on our mother, to acquire. We can't digest normal food, so we have to live from the energy of our mothers. And then as time goes, we start to be able to eat food, but somebody has to go and acquire that food, whether it be a vegetable or a meat of some sort, or whatever. And so in the same way that we develop from dependency, and then later on, let's say we learn how to hunt and gather ourselves, so then we become self-sufficient. So in the same way, on a psychic level or on a mental level, I have recognized recently that most people are functioning on the level of codependency, where they believe, most of us believe, that the energy that we require on a psychic level or on a mental level, life force energy, let's say, we believe that we have to get that externally from other people. And that's the dependency that I'm talking about. We have to depend on other people to, let's say, affirm our relevance. So let's say the young man that develops the charm and the finesse in how he speaks in order to get the attention of women, and so that those women can turn that energy back to him and say, wow, you are attractive and you are relevant. Or let's say the person who is the information hub that gets all the information through the whisperings and gossip, and then passes that information on in order to receive that energy from others to say, oh wow, you're relevant, you know all of this information. And so, and that over time as a tribe, we developed these sort of gossiping and whispering because we had to know about each other in order to survive. If we had somebody in the tribe that didn't have the tribe's best interest at heart, we had to know that and root them out. And if you were cast out of a tribe at some point, you likely would not survive. So we are all deeply ingrained with this exchange of information in the interest of survival. But all of that has its origins in energy. We need energy in order to propagate our influence and, let's say, propagate our species in the same way, that this is all patterned after the same thing. So at a certain point of development, then we replace, let's say, our parents with our social group. And that social group, like that's that pain of, the parent losing their child's attention to their friends, let's say in middle school or whenever it may be, because they're getting affirmed by others and they don't necessarily need that dependency of affirmation from their parents as much as they did when they were younger. And so this is all part of the process. We go through it. And then at a certain point of life, there's this, there is this point, just to continue on what he's saying, each level of life consciousness is sacrificial to the one above it, and it earns karmic merit and becomes part of the higher level. So he's talking about, as we evolve, we kind of sacrifice the level below to level up. There's this death, rebirth, and there's like a progression throughout as we evolve. And so he talks about how animal life is not necessarily evil, where they have to survive at the cost of another life, like a predator who has to eat prey in order to live. It's not necessarily evil, it's just deficient in energy. And so it's energy acquisition and energy harvesting, or whatever you want to call it. So the animal brain arose as life discovered that it had to get in order to survive. So hunter, gatherer, and in the same way on a social level, we have to get affirmation and energy from others to affirm ourselves, to be able to feel relevant, and that's an ego level, right? The ego would basically be a mentally constructed sense of self that is then something we hold out to others, and others affirm it and say, yeah, that's me. I am kind and generous, and I have all this information, or I'm attractive, or whatever, and this is the little box that I say this is me. And other people around me have affirmed that, have confirmed that that is me. So that now makes me feel okay. Like I'm not the only one that sees me. Other people see me too, and therefore my ego is intact, and I'm safe, and I'm okay. So he talks about, we inherit as a human an ego, a mind, which is then programmed by life. What it means is programmed to acquire energy. And if it's based on that ego that we inherit, we have to sort of, Jung talks about the first half of our life, we're developing that ego, and the second half of our life, we are sort of learning to let go of that ego. And so in the same way, to become enlightened, he says, means to transcend the ego by understanding it for what it truly is, a vestigial remnant of man's evolutionary origins. In other words, it's like, it's just left over from our evolution, our desire and our need, our basic need to survive and acquire energy. So something that I noted is that we don't need to get energy from anything outside of ourselves. This is at the point where we've evolved past this sort of inherited ego mechanisms for acquiring energy. At a certain point, instead of looking to external sources for that energy, we can turn our view inward and find that we have the cave of wonders, or the treasure within, that all of the sages and wisdom traditions point to. And when we turn inside to ourselves, we recognize that we don't need to get from anything outside of ourselves, other people at least. We don't need other people to affirm us in order to get that energy. We can find that in ourselves. And when we transcend our egoic evolutionary origins, we also recognize that no one else needs to get our energy, and that kind of functions as this zero sum. Like if somebody gets some of my energy, it's less for me, and then it's less for me to give to someone else, because that's like my life force energy, and it's like finite because I haven't learned to go within, and I just have as much as I have. And so the two things that I've learned in the process of the death and rebirth cycle, where I've been sort of plucked out of my community, and I've kind of lost all my codependent sort of community connections that have said, oh, affirm me, oh, I'm attractive, oh, I'm relevant in this way and that way, and oh, I'm good at this and I'm good at that, that's who I am. And then all of a sudden, pluck, you're cast out of your tribe. This is the death and rebirth, or the cast out of the Garden of Eden process. That then, instead of remaining in this codependent, I need my tribe to affirm me so that I can be relevant and I can be okay, and that is that sort of inherited ego that we get as a human just to survive, then I can go within for my life force energy. So let's say, for example, that I used to get let's say dependency on a drug, like let's say weed used to really calm my nerves when I needed to kind of get home and let loose after a difficult day. And then at a certain point, giving that up, I recognized that, okay, the cannabis plant developed to harvest energy and to propagate its own species. And so it developed an integrated system to partner with the human species. And then the human species, if you win over the human species has a potency to be able to propagate your species through industrial agriculture. And then, so let's say that we basically developed in order to integrate with the human system and to offer something that would create a dependency. So same with, other plants, like even wheat, like created a dependency. Now, agricultural societies, this is Yuval Harari from the book Sapiens. So wheat developed in such a way where it's like, who domesticated whom was his question, right? Did we domesticate wheat, or did wheat domesticate us and force us essentially to create agricultural societies and then go from hunter-gatherers to then agricultural societies that were kind of staying in one place, and then that built up the different, there were crossroads and trade routes and different cities and all of the world that we know today. And so there are two major lessons that I'm pulling from this sort of energy, how we've evolved to acquire energy and harvest energy. And then pretty soon we, on a psychic level, harvest energy from our tribe because that's how we evolved. But at a certain point, it's time to transcend those things and get outside of this place of needing energy from external sources, especially other people, where, it's almost like, man, this person exhausts me, or whatever the thing is because you feel your energy leaving when you're with a certain person that might have acquired a certain parasitical technique in order to harvest energy, that you feel like there's not a mutual exchange. And so that all people have developed all types of different energy harvesting systems, and you know who they are, right? Because when you're around a parasite, you feel your energy leaving, but you don't feel energy coming back. In a codependent relationship, you give energy, but you also receive it. But then there's this sort of, there's this not ideal place where if that person goes away or cheats or whatever the thing is, then you've lost your source. But if you learn how to go within, nobody can take that from you, and you are self-sufficient. And then the magic there is that when you turn that energy inward, you realize that it's limitless. And you realize that once you close off that valve of needing other people to affirm you, and you find that within yourself, then you're also not taking that energy from anyone else. And you also can't lose that. You can't have that taken away. And so that's a much more efficient process, whatever that means in terms of your relationships or, what tribe you're a part of and what role you play. That's a whole other story. But all we're talking about is energy. Do you get energy from external sources? Or if you found yourself on an island one day, would you be fully capable of having all of the energy that you needed to continue on and be happy and be at peace and, let's say, be intuitive and gain insights and find joy in the mundane things? So step 2 of the major realizations that I got from this kind of thought trail is setting boundaries with others who haven't learned to go within for their energy or life force. And so therefore they seek to harvest energy from others or to seek energy externally. That's when I recognized that there aren't many people that turn totally inward for all of their energetic needs. But once you do, you start to recognize that you've kind of cut off those valves. You start to have a lot less friends than you once did. Because once your valve has run dry, or once your life force or codependent sort of exchange has run dry, then people just kind of naturally exit your life. And a lot of times those are those lower vibration friendships that you had that once they're gone, you realize that, wow, I have a lot more energy without having to listen to that person, let's say, vent and complain and and sort of convey their victim mentality that I then affirm in them. And they're like, yeah, I was wronged, and therefore my ego has now been strengthened because somebody external from me has affirmed that this victim mentality is valid. And so what you recognize happening is once you turn that energy inward and you get that energy from within yourself, and then you draw boundaries with other people who haven't learned to turn that energy inward, to get that energy from inside themselves, an unlimited well of energy that we all have within ourselves, what you recognize is that you largely do find yourself on an island, but then, once you're resonating and vibrating at that level, very few people, but very key people who are self-sufficient in their energetic harvesting or in their energetic acquisition of energy, those are the people that come into your life because you kind of recognize each other. And then when you interact with somebody who doesn't necessarily need anything from you, but they're interacting with you because it's fun, because you want to, then that's where the magic happens of synergy. Synergy is that one person plus another person equals some, an exponential amount of energy that is generated by two people exchanging ideas but not taking energy from each other. And then what happens is, when you're meeting somebody who gets unlimited energy from within themselves and doesn't seek to need or take anything from you, and you're doing the same, then you start to have those sort of, wow, let's come together and create something that the sum of our parts could not have equaled this, but when we come together, there's this synergy that something bigger starts to want to come to be, because there's this, we've both transcended this inherited, ego-based, going and getting energy external from ourselves. So that seems to be kind of the key, is learn to go within for your energy, and then set boundaries with people who haven't learned that yet. And it is a process. You do lose a lot of the things that you once relied upon, and other people do lose the thing that they used to get from you that they had that codependency on. And it can be painful, and you can be surprised by certain people's reactions to that. When, their dealer disappears, they're going to have a reaction to that loss of energy and saying, man, I used to get this energy and now I don't get it. So what can I do to draw attention back to myself? And so some dysfunction does sort of arise when you're going through this process. But eventually you get to this place where no one can take it away from you, and you don't seek to take it away from anyone else. And all of the energy that you need, anytime that you feel like you're deficient in some energy, you're ready to go within and find that. Whether that means that you have to say, what is this sadness that I'm feeling? And I'm going to go within and confront it and go get to the root of it, instead of reaching out to somebody to affirm me and say, oh, you shouldn't be sad. And you say, you're right, I shouldn't be sad. Or let me turn to a drug of some type that makes it so that it takes the edge off and I don't have to feel that sadness. So that's what it kind of means to go within, is you have to actually see the things that arise that you typically would go external to get that energy or validation or whatever, and you have to do it yourself. But then once you do it yourself, you realize you're capable of doing anything yourself. That self-sufficiency then makes it so that you don't have to take energy from anyone else, and on you go. But this is kind of that leveling up where you start to cut off this codependency, then you become self-sufficient. And then I think that's infectious, where when people that are ready look to you and say, it's interesting, like this person doesn't need anything from me, and they're really nice to be around because I feel energy coming from them that they're not even necessarily giving me. They're just like living in a way that I feel inspired to do something better. I don't know what it is, but then some people figure out, it's like, oh, I want to model my life after them, and they seem like they've got it all together, and they don't have these codependent relationships, and maybe boom, it triggers that type of awakening and transcending that ego mentality of I've got to go to this external source and get the things that I need. So hopefully that's resonating with some of you out there, and hopefully, you recognize it might be time to learn to go through the things that you usually went outside to solve. You go within to solve those things, and then you draw those boundaries with the people outside of you who are trying, just by nature to harvest the energy that you would typically give them, to say, oh, that's so sad, poor you. No, you're great, and they shouldn't feel that way because that you're right. Oh, I'm right. Okay, so now my sort of ego-based mentality has been affirmed, and I can continue on. And next time I need that hit of energy, I know who I can go to. Well, now it's time to shut that down and go within, and then be an example, and then other people can go within when their time has come to learn to turn that energy inward and find the limitless treasure within that all the wisdom traditions have been pointing us to the whole time. Thanks for listening.